Hi, my name is Taliah Belcher, and the topic of my research was the impact of militarization on the financial and economic growth of developing and highly militarized countries. My major is in accounting and finance. My mentor was Dr. Gevorg Sargsyan in the Department of Business, and my research was in finance and economics. So just a little overview of what I will be talking about in this presentation. I will first go over the background and introduction of my research. I will go into the methodology and analysis. Then I will go into my results and conclusion. Then I will talk a little bit about further studies and where I can take this research. And then I will thank all the amazing people that helped me throughout this research. So first we'll start with the background and introduction. So I was initially introduced to this topic after talking with my mentor, Dr. Sargsyan. We met at the beginning of the semester and kind of discussed my interests and my passions, and I told him that I was really passionate about financial planning, and he proposed a topic to me that incorporated my love of financial planning with events that were happening today. And this topic kind of gives me the chance to explore financial planning in a really unique way. So the focus of this research project is to analyze, like I mentioned, the impact of militarization on the financial and economic growth of developing and highly militarized countries. There is debate on the effect of defense spending on the economy of a country, and many presuppose that military expenditures actually hinder the growth of an economy, by reducing the size of capital resources available for investment in public goods and services. And when I say public goods and services, I mean things such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And so the guns versus butter theory assumes that the use of resources for military expenditures actually prevents the resources from being used for the well-being of the public. The opportunity cost of spending on defense rather than on infrastructure and social programs is a really huge burden to bear, especially for developing countries. Also, defense spending drains out the skilled human capital from the economy into the military sector, which thus deprives the economy and causes adverse effects on its growth. In an economy where resources are already scarce, proper allocation of capital must exist to achieve the optimal macroeconomic and financial goals of that country. So this topic is also beneficial in determining how the economic status of a country affects its allocation of funds for militarization over investments in public goods and services. So in this research, we investigated the opportunity cost of countries spending on defense versus spending on public goods and services, with the goal of kind of analyzing the effect on the economic growth of a country that focuses more on militarization rather than investing in public goods and services, and vice versa. With this research, I believe countries will be able to improve the welfare of their citizens, balance their capital investments in defense and public goods and services, and grow the economy efficiently without hindrance. This topic is very important and actually very relevant now, as proper allocation of resources is vital for countries, especially those countries that suffer from regional instability. Heavy funding into the defense sector can prevent sufficient resources from being appropriately designated towards public goods and services. And a relevant example is the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is classified as a developing country, and because of the conflict with Russia, it has unfortunately suffered fatalities, civilian displacement, and impending economic downturn. So, current effects from the war in Ukraine include 3.5 million refugees and counting, an estimated between 10,000 and 15,000 casualties, and looming global economic catastrophe. So moving on to my hypothesis and what I actually examined. So my first hypothesis is the growth of military expenditures positively and directly influences GDP growth, which is gross domestic product. My second hypothesis is growth of military expenditures negatively and inversely influences FDI growth, and FDI stands for foreign direct investment. My third hypothesis is growth of military expenditures negatively influences investment growth. And my last and final hypothesis was growth of military expenditures negatively influences net import growth. So moving on to my methodology and analysis. So just a casual overview. I created a table of wars between 1980 and 2019. Then I searched databases, I chose targeted countries, and then I utilized causal multiple regression method and SPSS software. So going deeper into what each of these means. So during the data collection period, I actually relied heavily on gathering quantitative data. So to begin, we created a table of wars that occurred between 1980 and 2019, and this list included factors such as the start date of the war, the end date of the war, the name of the war, the location, the cumulative fatalities, and the financial and economic loss of the war. So we then utilize data from online databases to find this information, such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the United Nations. So we did this in an attempt to kind of familiarize ourselves with those countries that most often engage in wars and thus might rely heavily on militarization. And as I mentioned prior, for the purpose of this research, we specifically targeted developing and highly militarized countries. So from the table of wars, my mentor and I compiled a list of developing countries that we wanted to specifically focus on. So a few of those included Jordan, Ecuador, Sudan, Iran, Morocco, and Pakistan. So after this information was compiled, we used the same databases to search for more concentrated data about these countries, including Global Militarization Index, short or aka GMI rank, GDP per capita, military expenditures, FDI, investments, and then the number of imports of goods and services. So to perform an analysis of the data that we collected, we used the causal multiple regression method and the SPSS software. So this method helped us to estimate the relationships between military expenditures and GDP growth, FDI growth, investment growth, and the growth in the import of goods and services. And SPSS is a statistical software program that enabled us to determine the correlation and the strength of this correlation between these variables. Our expected products after analyzing the data was to have a correlation and a regression table. From this, we created a visual representation illustrating the connection between our independent and dependent variables. So here is just a little snippet of the list of wars that I created. As you can see, there are a lot of wars that happened in Asia and Africa, and then a few in Europe. And then here is the table that we created of the information that we found, like GMI, military expenditures, FDI, things of that nature. And so this shows the 25 countries that we used, and this is just the data from 2019, but we did it from the years between 1980 and 2019. And then here is our expected products. We have a correlation table on the top left, and then we have our regression table on the right, and then the bottom left shows the formulas that we used when we utilized the causal multiple regression method. So our analysis does show that our results were significant and that there is a strong correlation between military expenditures and investment, FDI, and the import of goods and services. And then moving on to our results and conclusions. So here are the graphs that we created. And so our results do illustrate that defense spending has an inverse relationship with FDI, investment growth, and import growth in developing countries. For GDP, our results were inconclusive. As you can see in the top right graph, we couldn't establish concrete evidence that militarization had a clear positive or negative effect on GDP. And then here's just a summary of what I kind of mentioned on the previous slide. As I said, defense spending has an inverse relationship with FDI, investment growth, and import growth in developing countries. Our results for GDP were inconclusive, but our results do suggest that militarization can have damaging effects on the economy of a developing country. And then moving into how I hope to expand this research in the future. So this research will be expanded to include developed countries in later studies. Further research will also take place at two research institutes in Europe, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, and the Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies in Bonn, Germany. So both organizations have agreed to accept me as a visiting researcher, and they will aid in the gathering of data for this project. And in fact, they actually granted me access to their databases where there's ample information of the factors that I'm investigating. So I will be able to expand on this research. I also am a McNair Scholar, so in that program I hope to focus on developing countries, and then whenever I go abroad to these institutes, I want to connect the research that I did in McNair and OUR and kind of research the flow of wealth between developing countries and developed countries when it comes to military expenditures. And lastly, just giving a big thank you. I want to personally thank my mentor, Dr. Gevorg Sargsyan, and the College of Business for helping me through this process and for just always being so supportive and ready to answer any questions I had. And I would also like to thank the Office of Undergraduate Research and Dr. Barim for allowing this project to happen. Without them, none of this could have taken place. And also thank you to Dr. Barim for always being so patient. So. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.